I can't tell you how much I sympathize with the way everybody has had to endure this unbelievably testing and challenging time.
At 75, King Charles has finally broken his silence, confirming a secret that has haunted the monarchy for decades. For years, speculation and whispers circled the royal halls, with historians, journalists, and insiders all chasing fragments of truth. Now, Charles himself has laid bare a revelation so shocking it could redefine the legacy of the crown forever. This isn't just another royal rumor, it's the truth everyone feared, yet longed to hear. What is this haunting secret, and why reveal it now? Charles and the secret that haunted the monarchy. The tragic death of Princess Diana on August 31, 1997, in a Paris car crash shook the entire world to its core. News of her passing traveled across continents within minutes, drawing tears from millions who felt they had lost more than a royal figure. To the public, she had been the people's princess, a woman whose warmth, kindness, and vulnerability connected deeply with ordinary lives. Yet behind the palace gates, the grief was even more personal and raw. No one felt it more profoundly than Charles, the man who had once been her husband, and who at that time was still entangled in a complicated web of love, regret, and unfinished emotions. Though their marriage had collapsed under the weight of infidelity, bitter quarrels, and relentless media scrutiny, Charles's reaction to Diana's death revealed something the world had never fully seen: the depth of his pain. Reports later surfaced that when he came face to face with her lifeless body, the usually reserved Prince of Wales was overcome with uncontrollable sorrow. Witnesses described him as howling in anguish, his body trembling with grief and nearly collapsing under the unbearable weight of the moment. For a man raised under strict royal protocols of restraint and composure, this outpouring of emotion was extraordinary. It was as though in losing Diana, Charles lost not only a former wife, but also a chance at redemption. In the final weeks of Diana's life, she and Charles had begun to soften toward one another, cautiously building the foundations of friendship after years of tension. Their exchanges grew warmer, and on the night before her death, Charles reportedly wrote her an affectionate letter, a message she never saw, now remembered as a symbol of their unfinished peace. After her passing, Charles clashed with royal tradition, insisting on a public farewell worthy of her global influence. His determination prevailed, and on September 6, 1997, billions worldwide watched as Westminster Abbey hosted one of history's most monumental funerals, honoring Diana not merely as a princess, but as a beloved humanitarian and enduring cultural icon. For Charles, life moved forward as royal duty demanded. He eventually stepped into his long-standing relationship with Camilla, and over time, the public perception of their union softened. Yet by his own admission, Diana's loss left wounds that never fully closed. Beneath the polished speeches and ceremonial crowns, there remained a man who carried scars of regret, moments of guilt, and memories of a woman whose presence continued to shape his life. Behind the grandeur of monarchy lies a simple, painful truth. Charles's grief for Diana never truly ended. It was hidden beneath protocol, shadowed by responsibility, but it lingered always, an enduring reminder of love interrupted, peace unfinished, and a bond that even tragedy could not erase. Although their marriage went sour, their lavish wedding ceremony was unique and one of its kind. Could it really be that big? When, why, and how did it turn sour? Let's find out. The glittering illusion of a royal fairy tale. On the morning of July 29, 1981, the world seemed to hold its breath. Streets that were usually filled with the noise of traffic grew quieter, televisions flickered in countless living rooms, and radios buzzed with anticipation. Across bustling cities and sleepy villages alike, nearly 750 million people tuned in, their eyes fixed on one single event. It was not a political announcement, not a global crisis, but something that felt both intimate and grand at the same time: the wedding of Lady Diana Spencer to Prince Charles, heir to the British throne. What unfolded looked as though it had been plucked straight from the pages of a fairy tale. The young bride, only 20 years old, stepped into St. Paul's Cathedral, her cheeks flushed with the shy glow of innocence. She was cloaked in ivory silk, lace, and pearls, with a gown so majestic that its train stretched longer than any scene in living memory. An endless river of fabric flowing behind her as she walked slowly toward her destiny. At the altar stood the man who would one day be king, awaiting her with a measured composure befitting his role. Together, they appeared to embody every dream of romance and royalty that the world had ever cherished. The press wasted no time in shaping the narrative. Newspapers splashed the words, "Wedding of the Century" across their front pages. Headlines spoke of a fairy tale come to life and a promise of happily ever after. Photographers captured every carefully staged moment, the stolen glances, the gleaming jewels, the golden carriage ride, and the endless waves of cheering crowds. For those watching at home, it was easy to believe that they were witnessing the perfect beginning of a perfect marriage. Yet, as with all grand performances, there was a curtain, and behind that curtain lay truths that were far from the glittering fantasy. What millions of people could not see was that this royal spectacle, while dazzling on the outside, concealed a fragile foundation. Smiles may have been wide, and jewels may have sparkled, but deep within the walls of the palace, shadows were already forming. The story the cameras told was one of love. The story reality whispered was one of duty, sacrifice, and unspoken sorrow. Diana, barely out of her teenage years, was stepping not just into marriage, but into a machine, an institution older than her, larger than her, and infinitely more complex than she could have imagined. She was marrying a man burdened not only by the crown he was destined to wear, but also by ties of the heart that stretched elsewhere. To the world, it was romance. To those closest to the couple, it was already a struggle. For Diana, this day was not merely about exchanging vows. It was the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways few could endure. Beneath the tiaras and celebrations, she faced a life of scrutiny, isolation, and battles that would challenge her spirit. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on her young shoulders. She was expected to smile when she felt like crying, to appear confident when she felt utterly lost, and to play the role of a princess when she still longed for the freedom of a girl. What millions of viewers celebrated as the start of a love story was, in truth, the opening chapter of a much darker narrative. The cracks in the marriage, invisible that day, would only widen with time. Behind closed doors, loneliness and betrayal began to write their lines in her story. And so, while the world believed it had witnessed a fairy tale destined for happily ever after, Diana's reality was far more complicated. The grandeur of that July morning may have dazzled millions, but for her, it marked the beginning of a struggle, one that would shape her spirit, test her sanity, and, tragically, alter the course of her life forever. Before the grand royal wedding that memorable day, who was Diana known to be? Let's delve into the details of the young lady who married into the royal family, barely crossing her teen ages. A young girl, caught in a gilded trap. Before the glittering crown, before the endless photographs and global adoration, Diana Frances Spencer was, at her heart, just a young girl with ordinary dreams. She was not born into a perfect fairy tale. Her childhood was marked by cracks in the family foundation, the divorce of her parents leaving a scar that never quite faded. That experience of instability shaped her deeply, making her long for the one thing she never truly had growing up: a secure, loving home filled with warmth and affection. Diana adored music. She loved to dance, and she was at her happiest around children. Her vision of the future was not one of palaces or power, but of laughter around a dinner table, of holding her children close, and of a life rooted in love rather than duty. When she crossed paths with Prince Charles, Diana was still barely more than a teenager, full of innocence and untested hopes. She was shy, almost painfully so, with a soft voice and gentle manner that seemed a stark contrast to the rigid and polished world of the royals. Yet those very qualities made her appear to be the perfect fit. To a monarchy obsessed with appearances and lineage, Diana seemed like a safe choice. She was aristocratic enough to meet the unspoken standards, untouched by scandal, and young enough to be molded into the role they wanted her to play. For Charles, then in his early 30s and under increasing pressure to marry, she seemed to check all the right boxes. But beneath this carefully constructed picture, a troubling truth lingered. From the very beginning, there was another woman in the story, Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles's emotional connection to her was no secret in private, royal circles, even if it was hidden from the public eye. For Diana, whose heart clung fiercely to ideals of love, loyalty, and devotion, this unseen rival would become an unbearable shadow. She entered the marriage believing in romance, while Charles entered it with obligations and divided affections. The seeds of heartbreak were sown long before the wedding bells rang. Even more isolating was the palace itself. Rather than shielding Diana from pressure, the machinery of royalty only magnified it. From the moment she stepped into that gilded cage, her life ceased to belong to her. Every word she spoke, every step she took, every flicker of expression was examined, measured, and then packaged for the world. She was expected to be a flawless image, a symbol of youth and elegance, while her personal needs, fears, and vulnerabilities were brushed aside. The world was sold a fairy tale of glittering gowns and royal romance, but behind the veil it was less about love and more about maintaining the spectacle. Diana had believed she was marrying a man, someone who would love her and share her longing for family. What she could not yet see was that she was binding herself to an institution, a centuries-old system that demanded sacrifice above self, appearances over authenticity, and duty before desire. In her innocence, she walked into history, unaware that the very qualities that made her beloved by millions would also make her a threat to the rigid monarchy she had just joined. What was Diana's marriage with Charles like? Was it beyond her expectations? Let's dive into the details of the reality that defined the royal marriage. The shattered illusion. The days that followed the dazzling wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer quickly stripped away the dreamlike glow that the world had witnessed on television. For the millions who had watched, it looked like the perfect fairy tale. An elegant princess marrying her prince, riding into a future that promised joy, love, and endless admiration. But behind the palace walls, Diana's reality was far removed from the glittering illusion. The radiant smiles she displayed for cameras often disguised a heart weighed down by loneliness, confusion, and an ache for affection that seemed forever out of reach. Charles, deeply tied to duty and the heavy expectations of being heir to the throne, carried a quiet burden of his own. His emotional attachment to Camilla Parker Bowles, an attachment he could not sever even after his marriage, meant that Diana rarely received the love and reassurance she longed for. Instead of finding in her husband a source of warmth and security, Diana found herself in a marriage that often felt like a battlefield, fought with silence, cold gestures, and unspoken resentment. Every misunderstanding widened the distance between them, leaving Diana increasingly vulnerable. Her fragility did not escape the ever-watchful eyes of the press. To the media, Diana was not just a princess. She was an endless headline. Every outfit she wore, every tilt of her head, every smile or frown became material to be dissected, magnified, and published. The constant scrutiny only intensified her personal struggles. Her battle with bulimia worsened under the pressure, while depression and self-doubt crept deeper into her daily life. Rather than being protected, she was left exposed, her private pain becoming fodder for the world's entertainment. One might expect that the palace, with all its grandeur and resources, would offer her comfort and understanding. But within those cold corridors, Diana's emotional turmoil was not met with compassion. It was treated as a disturbance. To the institution, she was not a young woman in need of love and reassurance. She was an asset. She was the bright, beautiful figure who charmed crowds, boosted the monarchy's public image, and secured its future through her children. Her tears, Her cries for help, her very real suffering were seen as inconvenient shadows cast on the shining facade. Meanwhile, the story told to the outside world was carefully orchestrated. Smiling photographs on the steps of palaces, staged hand-in-hand walks through gardens, and family vacations presented an image of happiness and unity. The fairy tale was kept alive for the public eye, but behind the glossy magazine covers, Diana often cried alone in her rooms, feeling abandoned and unheard. The grandeur of her surroundings only deepened her sense of entrapment. It was a gilded cage, beautiful but suffocating. And so, a heartbreaking contrast emerged. To the people, Diana was the people's princess, adored across nations for her warmth, kindness, and humanity. Yet inside the palace, she was just another moving part in the machinery of monarchy, expected to fulfill her role without complaint. This sharp duality, adored outside, isolated inside, would not only shape her marriage but would eventually come to define her entire story, making her both a beloved icon and a tragic figure in modern history. While it became clear that she was not married just to Prince Charles, but to the entire institution, how was she able to go about her duties in the institution, as a wife and as a mother? Let's dig into the details. A battle of hearts and images. As the seasons of her life rolled on, Diana came to a sobering realization. If peace could not be found within the towering walls of the palace, she would have to seek it elsewhere. The gilded corridors and glittering events, which to the outside world looked like a dream, often felt like a prison to her. Yet rather than letting that emptiness consume her, she chose to redirect her energy towards something greater. She embraced her natural gift for compassion, pouring her heart into humanitarian causes that resonated far beyond the gates of royalty. Diana broke barriers when others hesitated. At a time when fear and ignorance surrounded the AIDS epidemic, she shook hands with patients without gloves, offering them dignity when society treated them like outcasts. She courageously walked through active minefields in Angola, her every step a message that no danger was too great if it meant shining a light on forgotten human suffering. She lent her voice to the silenced, her platform to the marginalized, and her presence to those who had long been ignored. And the people responded, not out of duty to the crown, but out of love for her authenticity. Diana was not adored because of her title, but because she was human in ways that felt rare in her world. She laughed without restraint, cried openly, and even stumbled in public, only to rise again with grace. Unlike the stiff, rehearsed performances that the monarchy demanded, she was raw and real. To many, she wasn't simply the Princess of Wales. She was the people's princess, someone who mirrored their struggles, their flaws, and their resilience. But this bond with the public carried consequences. Inside the palace, where tradition, order, and hierarchy reigned supreme, Diana's growing influence became a threat. Her light often outshone Charles's, and in a family where rank was everything, that was considered unacceptable. Whispers echoed through the halls. She was too emotional, too unpredictable, too outspoken. What they truly feared was simpler. Diana was becoming larger than the institution itself. The cracks that had long existed in her marriage to Charles now widened into fractures too deep to hide. Affairs and betrayals spilled out of the shadows and into the glaring spotlight of the media. Tabloids feasted on the turmoil, and the once carefully polished image of a perfect royal union crumbled. The world, which had once celebrated their wedding as a modern fairy tale, now watched the unraveling of a story far more complicated. It was in her now legendary television interview that Diana spoke the words that would echo for generations. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. With that single sentence, she tore down the veil of illusion that had been so carefully maintained. No scripted royal announcement, no palace statement could compete with the power of her truth. The fairy tale was shattered, and in its place emerged something far more raw. A story of a woman fighting for her identity, struggling against manipulation, and clinging to survival under a merciless public gaze. The pomp and ceremony had masked it for years. But now the world could no longer ignore it. The crown glittered, yes, but behind it lived heartbreak, sacrifice, and the unyielding courage of a woman who refused to be silenced. At what point did Diana decide to pay the price of her much-desired freedom? Was she able to get it? Let's find out. Love, loss, and rebellion. By the middle of the 1990s, Diana, Princess of Wales, found herself standing at one of the most defining crossroads of her life. Her marriage to Prince Charles was over, and with the divorce came both liberation and uncertainty. No longer bound by the rigid expectations of being a royal wife, Diana was determined to reclaim her own voice and identity. She wanted to live as more than just a figure defined by the monarchy. She began to carve out a new path, one that startled the establishment and fascinated the world. Diana defied traditions that had once restrained her. She spoke openly about her personal struggles, refusing to hide behind the polished image of royal perfection. She gave honest interviews about her pain, her eating disorders, her loneliness, and her turbulent marriage. These admissions shocked the monarchy, but they also drew millions closer to her. People saw in her a raw humanity rarely displayed by someone of such status. She wasn't just a princess in gowns and tiaras. She was a woman searching for love, peace, and meaning. Her freedom, however, came at a devastating cost. The media, which had once celebrated her as a fairy tale bride, turned into a relentless predator. Photographers followed her every move with frightening obsession. Whether she was dropping her sons off at school, attending charity events, or enjoying private holidays, Diana's life became an open spectacle for public consumption. Every smile, every tear, every rumored romance was photographed, analyzed, and sold to tabloids hungry for profit. The same press that had helped build her global image now played a major role in her torment. Despite the suffocating attention, Diana pursued her passion for humanitarian work. She championed causes that others were too afraid to touch, embracing AIDS patients at a time when fear and stigma kept them isolated, walking through active landmine fields to draw global attention to their dangers, and comforting children and families shattered by poverty and illness. These acts of compassion turned her into a global icon of empathy and courage. People around the world admired her not just because she was a princess, but because she dared to stand for the vulnerable and the voiceless. Yet, her personal life remained turbulent. In her quest for genuine love and connection, Diana often found herself in complicated relationships, some of which brought her closer to betrayal and more media scrutiny. She walked a dangerous line, desired by millions, but never truly safe from intrusion. The monarchy criticized her independence, the tabloids fed on her vulnerability, and the paparazzi chased her with merciless determination. Her existence became a paradox. She had broken free from the cage of an unhappy marriage, only to find herself imprisoned in the unrelenting glare of fame. What she longed for, love, normalcy, and peace, remained painfully out of reach. The pursuit of these simple dreams made her life both inspiring and tragic. On the night of August 31st, 1997, in Paris, that pursuit came to a shocking end. The car crash that claimed her life silenced her story far too soon, but it also ensured that her memory would never fade. Diana was no longer just a princess who had once lived a fairy tale. She became a legend. Her life and death exposed the crushing weight of monarchy, celebrity, and spectacle. And though her voice was silenced, her legacy of compassion and courage continues to echo across generations. Beyond the fairy tale, what legacy did Diana leave for the royal family? Why did her death haunt the monarchy so much? Let's talk about the impact Diana's had the monarchy and the globe. Diana's enduring legacy. Decades after her passing, the story of Princess Diana continues to echo across generations. The fascination does not lie in a perfect tale of royalty or an unblemished life of privilege. It lies in her humanity. She was not without flaws. She stumbled, felt pain, and carried wounds that often showed through the glittering surface of her world. Yet, in the midst of those struggles, Diana managed to shine with a rare kind of grace and a compassion so genuine that millions felt personally touched by her. Her life made society pause and rethink what it truly meant to belong to the monarchy. For centuries, royals were viewed as distant figures, symbols more than people, wrapped in gold and duty. But Diana, with her warmth and openness, revealed something very different. She showed that behind the crowns, gowns, and historic palaces were human beings, frail in many of the same ways as everyone else, susceptible to insecurity, heartbreak, and mistakes. By allowing her vulnerability to be seen, she broke through the walls of tradition. She did not storm the monarchy with politics or defiance, but with something far more powerful: emotional honesty. Her courage to be authentic was her quiet rebellion. She embraced causes that others ignored, shaking hands with AIDS patients when the world was gripped by fear and stigma, walking through minefields in forgotten corners of the globe, and comforting the sick, lonely, and marginalized. With every act of kindness, she made royalty feel less about distance and more about humanity. Her life told people everywhere that compassion was not weakness, but strength in its purest form. Today, Diana's legacy is visible in the paths her sons walk. Princes William and Harry, in different ways, carry her torch. In their commitment to mental health advocacy, in their willingness to speak openly about loss, pain, and healing, they reflect the values their mother embodied. They remind the world that true influence lies not in the grandeur of crowns, but in the ability to connect with people's hearts. The monarchy itself has been reshaped by Diana's presence and absence. Where once silence and stoicism were the default, there is now greater emphasis on openness, accessibility, and dialogue. Topics like mental health, once hidden in the shadows, are now part of public conversation, partly because she had the courage to speak, to show her own struggles without shame. Her influence stretched far beyond the palace gates, leaving ripples across societies and movements worldwide. When the world tuned in to her wedding in 1981, an event watched by 750 million people, it was framed as the ultimate fairy tale, a love story worthy of the ages. Yet the fascination that lingers is not rooted in the illusion of romance. Instead, it comes from the truth that unfolded afterward. The real story was not about a flawless princess living happily ever after, but about a young woman stepping into a palace of gold and daring to remain real in a realm built upon appearances. And perhaps that is why Diana endures in memory. She taught us an unforgettable lesson: that fairy tales may crumble, but the virtues of truth, compassion, and courage are timeless. Castles may rise and fall, crowns may pass from one head to another, but the light of a heart that dared to be genuine burns far longer. Diana remains unforgettable not because she was perfect, but because she was profoundly human. And in that humanity, she became extraordinary. So do you think King Charles truly went all out for Diana after her death? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.